The great chamber of the Intergalactic Council was alive with voices, colors, and cold stares. Its ceiling stretched high above, glowing with lines of energy that pulsed like veins across the stone walls. Creatures from 100 worlds filled the rows of seats, their robes heavy with jewels, their faces proud and dismissive. This was not a place where mercy lived. It was a place where decisions carried the weight of life and death for entire planets. On this day, the Council gathered to decide the fate of Earth. To the aliens, Earth was nothing more than a scarred rock, ruined by its own people and left to rot at the edge of space. They spoke of burning skies, poisoned seas, and crumbling cities where no future could grow. Their voices overlapped, mocking and cruel, each insult louder than the last. The hall filled with laughter, sharp and heartless, as if the suffering of billions was nothing more than entertainment. Then the doors opened. A lone human woman entered the chamber. She walked without haste, her steps steady, her shoulders straight. Compared to the towering aliens, she seemed small and fragile. No guards walked at her side, no advisors whispered behind her. She came alone. But the silence that followed her footsteps was not born of pity. It was born of curiosity. For a long moment no one spoke. Her presence was strange, almost out of place among the glittering officials. Yet there was something in her eyes, a quiet flame that refused to die. She moved to the center of the chamber and stopped beneath the circle of light that shone down on the floor. An alien with silver skin and eyes like polished glass rose first. His voice was smooth but dripping with mockery. "Human, you stand before us to defend a planet that even your own kind abandons. Earth is dying. Your air is foul, your seas black, your soil poisoned. Why should this council waste its breath on a world that is already lost?" The chamber echoed with cruel laughter again, the sound bouncing from wall to wall like hammers striking stone. Some officials leaned back in their seats, smirking. Others sneered openly, their eyes filled with arrogance. To them, the woman was a relic of a forgotten race, clinging to hope like a fool. But she did not flinch. She did not lower her gaze. Instead, she lifted her head and spoke, her voice steady and clear. "You look at Earth and see only what is broken. You see storms and ruins, but you do not see us. You do not see children laughing as they run through cracked streets. You do not see farmers planting seeds in dry ground, waiting for rain. You do not see families sharing bread, warmth, and stories even under broken roofs. You think Earth is dead. I tell you, Earth is alive." The hall shifted. Some whispers faded. A few alien eyes, sharp and suspicious, locked onto her. Yet others laughed again, though their laughter carried less strength than before. A creature with wings black as night slammed its claws against the table. His voice was rough, each word like falling stones. "Lies. We have seen your world. We have seen oceans poisoned with oil, skies filled with smoke, forests cut to stumps. You speak of life, but all we see is death. You are blinded by loyalty to a world that no longer deserves loyalty." The woman turned to face him. Her hands did not shake. Her eyes did not waver. "You think loyalty is blindness? No. Loyalty is strength. We do not deny our struggles. We face them. We breathe poisoned air and still build homes. We drink bitter water and still raise children. We fight storms and still plant gardens. You say Earth is unlivable. I say Earth teaches us how to live." Her words struck harder than any weapon. They rang in the air like iron against stone. Even those who had mocked her leaned forward, caught in the rhythm of her voice. Another alien rose, taller than the rest, its limbs long and thin, its eyes burning red like coals. "If your world holds such value," it hissed, "then prove to us what humans have that others do not. Why should Earth not be erased from the stars?" She answered without pause, her tone firm, almost sharp. "What we have is something you cannot measure. We have hearts that refuse to surrender. You see our world as broken, yet we still call it home. Home is not about comfort. Home is not about perfection. Home is about belonging, about standing together, about refusing to abandon what we love. That is why Earth lives. and that is why humanity will never bow. The chamber grew still. The echoes of her voice spread like waves across the grand hall. For the first time, no one laughed. No one sneered. Instead, the silence carried weight, heavy and unshakable. Eyes that once looked down on her now studied her carefully, as if they had misjudged what it meant to be human. The woman stood alone in the circle of light. She had no army, no weapons, no allies at her side. And yet, in that moment, she was stronger than all of them. The council had not spoken its judgment. The voices of power had not given their final word. But something had already changed. The mockery had cracked. Doubt had entered their eyes. And for the first time in that chamber, Earth was not just a ruined rock. It was a world that demanded to be heard. The silence in the chamber did not last long. The moment the woman's words faded, the room stirred again. Murmurs rose like a restless tide, and voices clashed in the air. Some aliens scoffed, saying her words were nothing but emotional tricks. Others frowned, as if something in her defiance had touched them deeper than they cared to admit. Yet still the human stood there, alone, unshaken, a single figure facing a sea of doubt. She had always known this moment would come. She had known she would have no allies here. Humanity was not invited to sit among these mighty rulers. Humanity was tolerated, watched from a distance, treated as a race of survivors rather than leaders. And now, in this great hall where every voice carried the weight of a planet, she was the only human voice. A lonely voice, fragile against the noise, yet unwilling to bend. An alien with skin that shimmered like molten gold rose from its seat. Its tone was cold and sharp, each word designed to cut. You speak of laughter and hope, but what does hope matter in a dying place? What use are children's smiles when your skies burn red? What good is loyalty to a home that cannot protect you? The words hung heavy, and many in the chamber nodded. For them, life was measured in safety, in abundance, in worlds where danger was rare. To them, her defense sounded weak, even foolish. But the woman did not look away. She answered, her voice calm but carrying a strength that filled the air. Hope is not decoration. Hope is survival. When skies burn, children still dream. When seas rise, families still hold each other close. You ask why we cling to Earth? It is because every breath we take there is a victory. Every day we live, we win against the odds. That is something your perfect worlds cannot teach. A ripple spread through the chamber. Some shifted uncomfortably, their expressions hardening. Others leaned forward, their eyes narrowing, curious despite themselves. She went on, her voice growing firmer. You call me foolish because I stand here alone. But tell me, when has humanity ever needed numbers to be strong? We have stood in battles where we were outnumbered 1,000 to 1. We have crossed oceans with nothing but wooden ships. We have built cities out of ash and rubble. Alone does not mean weak. Alone means tested. The chamber quieted again. Her words had weight, and that weight pressed down on even the most dismissive. Still, not all were willing to listen. A creature with 4 eyes and a mouth full of sharp teeth leaned forward, its voice dripping with scorn. You say you are tested. But what of failure? What of the wars you start among yourselves? What of the machines that poison your soil, the weapons that burn your skies? You are not survivors, you are destroyers. The accusation struck hard. It was the truth they always used to dismiss Earth, the truth that made the council laugh at humans as reckless children. And yet, the woman's gaze did not falter. Yes, she said softly. We have destroyed. Yes, we have made mistakes that burned deep scars into our world. But we are not defined by what we break, we are defined by how we rise again. Every mistake is followed by hands that rebuild. Every wound is followed by voices that heal. That is what it means to be human. We fall and we stand again. We bleed, and we still walk forward. For the first time, the sharp-toothed alien fell silent. Could not laugh, could not sneer. Her words had changed the air in the chamber. She was still one voice, still lonely against a sea of power, but she was no longer unheard. The silence that followed was not empty. It was thoughtful, heavy, filled with unease. She lifted her hand, not in anger, but in quiet strength. You speak of Earth as if it is already gone. But Earth is not gone. It still breathes. Its rivers still flow even when poisoned. Its forests still grow even when cut. Its people still love even when broken. That is life. And life, even in pain, is worth more than all the comfort in the universe. Her voice echoed through the chamber, ringing against the walls, refusing to be ignored. She was one human in a hall of giants, but her words made her stand taller than any of them. The council shifted uneasily. Some exchanged quick glances. Some muttered under their breath. But none could deny that her voice had pierced through their pride. In that vast room filled with power and arrogance, she was still only one. One woman, one defender, one voice. But that voice carried something no weapon could destroy, truth born of struggle. And though she stood alone, her voice filled the chamber so completely that for a moment, it felt as though the entire human race stood with her. The chamber grew restless. What had begun as mockery was now turning into something heavier, something the council had not expected. The human's voice had carried far more weight than her size or her lonely presence should have allowed. She stood in the circle of light, calm but unyielding, while the alien leaders murmured among themselves. It was no longer amusement, it was irritation. One of the eldest voices rose, deep and commanding. The speaker was a being whose body shimmered like crystal, sharp edges catching the light. His words echoed across the hall. You speak with passion, human, but passion does not save worlds. You claim your people endure, but endurance is not greatness. Endurance is survival. Is that all you bring before us? A race that clings like weeds to a poisoned ground. Laughter followed again, but this time it sounded forced, less certain than before. Still, the chamber was not ready to yield. They pressed harder. The woman took a breath. Her heart pounded, but her voice did not tremble. You call survival small, but tell me, what is greater than standing when the universe wants you broken? You sit here in comfort with power and riches. You measure life by what is easy, but we measure life by struggle. Struggle teaches strength. Struggle shapes us into more than what we were before. That is greatness. Her words stirred something, but the opposition grew sharper. A figure with a long neck and a voice like a blade cut through the air. If Earth is so great, why is it filled with conflict? Why do your people fight each other? Why do your cities burn by your own hands? A race that cannot even live in peace with itself has no right to stand before us. The chamber agreed with this, their murmurs swelling. This was the truth they always used against humanity, the truth they wielded like a weapon. The woman closed her eyes for a moment, then opened them again, steady. Yes, we fight. We argue. We wound each other. But even in war, we find reasons to rebuild. Even in hate, we learn lessons that lead us back to love. We are not perfect, but perfection is not life. Life is struggle, forgiveness, rebuilding again and again. You judge us because we stumble, but you do not see that we keep rising. Her words made the crystal-bodied elder shift uneasily. It was not the answer they had expected. But before the silence could settle, another alien struck. It was a massive creature with 4 arms and skin like iron. His voice was a roar. Words, nothing but words. You speak of hope and survival, but where is your proof? If Earth is worth anything, why do so many leave it behind? Why do humans flee to other colonies, seeking better skies and cleaner air? Is that not proof that Earth is unlivable, even for its own children? The question hit hard. The council nodded, their faces stern, as if they had finally cornered her. The woman's gaze did not waver. Yes, many leave. Yes, many seek cleaner skies. But those who remain, those who plant in broken soil, those who drink bitter water, those who stay and build again, are the reason Earth is still alive. It is easy to love beauty. Takes courage to love brokenness. That courage is what defines us. Her voice grew stronger, each word striking like a hammer. You say proof? I am proof. I stand here not as someone who ran, but as someone who stayed. I have breathed the smoke, walked through the ruins, and still called it home. Do not tell me Earth is unlivable when I have lived it myself. The chamber fell into silence again. For the second time, laughter refused to come. Still, not all were convinced. A smaller alien with glowing eyes leaned forward, speaking in a sharp whisper that cut across the hall. And what happens when your courage breaks? What happens when Earth truly dies? Will you still cling to it then? Or will you admit defeat? The woman looked around the chamber, her eyes meeting theirs one by one. Her voice dropped lower, steady and firm. Even if Earth dies, its spirit will not. We will carry it within us wherever we go. You cannot erase Earth by calling it unlivable. You cannot erase humanity by mocking our struggle. We live, we fight, and we remember. That is something no death can take from us. Her words rang through the vast chamber, pressing against every corner. For the first time, the debate was no longer playful. It had turned fierce, sharp with tension. The council no longer laughed with ease. They questioned, they doubted, but they also listened. The human had forced them to do something they were not used to doing, respect. And though the decision was still far away, one thing was clear. Her lonely voice had turned into something larger. It was no longer just one human speaking. In her defiance, the entire spirit of Earth seemed to stand in that hall, demanding to be heard. The fight had only begun. The chamber no longer roared with laughter. What had started as mocking now felt heavier, more serious. The human woman's voice had pulled the mask off their arrogance and replaced it with unease. Still, the council was not ready to yield. They believed reason and facts were on their side. They believed emotion had no place in judgment. But what they did not expect was that the very thing they dismissed, emotion, would soon strike them harder than any weapon. A tall alien with skin like rippling water stood, its voice calm but cutting. You speak of survival, of rising again, of courage. But all these are just stories. Where is the proof of your greatness? What makes humanity worth saving? What can your race offer that others cannot? The question hung in the chamber like a blade. The council leaned forward. This was the test they believed she could not pass. Numbers, logic, technology, on these grounds, humanity was weak compared to them. The woman took a long breath. She knew she could not fight with numbers. She knew she could not list weapons or riches. But she also knew that strength was not measured only in steel or wealth. She raised her voice, steady and warm. You want proof? Then I will not give you numbers. I will give you what lives in us, our hearts. We are not stronger than you. We are not richer. But we carry something no storm, no fire, no war has ever destroyed. Love. The chamber stirred, confused. Love was not a word they expected to hear in this place of power. Whispers broke out, mocking again but weaker than before. Some scoffed, but others listened carefully, drawn against their will. She continued, her tone quiet but fierce. Love is the reason a mother gives her last piece of bread to her child. Love is why families hold hands in the dark, even when the world around them falls apart. Love is why strangers run into burning houses to save people they have never met. You call our world broken, but in our brokenness, love shines brighter. That is what makes humanity unbreakable. The words echoed, and in the silence that followed, something shifted. One of the council members, a creature with a crown of glowing horns, leaned forward. His voice was sharp. Love? Do not be foolish. Love is weakness. Love makes you sacrifice logic. Love makes you risk survival for another. It is not strength. It is the reason you fall again and again. The woman turned her eyes toward him, calm and unwavering. Yes, love is sacrifice, but sacrifice is not weakness. Sacrifice is the greatest strength we have. When one human stands for another, even against death, that is power. Not the power of weapons, not the power of wealth, but the power of the heart. That is what keeps us alive when everything else says we should die. Her words hung heavy in the vast chamber. The alien with glowing horns tried to speak again, but his voice faltered. He had no answer. The woman stepped forward in the circle of light. Her voice grew steadier, louder, filling every corner of the hall. You measure greatness by control, by riches, by comfort. We measure it by kindness, by courage, by the ability to keep loving even when there is no reason left. When our cities fall, we do not walk away, we rebuild them together. When storms take our homes, neighbors open their doors. When death comes, we fight to protect each other until our last breath. That is humanity. That is Earth. The silence that followed was different this time. It was not the silence of disbelief or mockery. It was the silence of a truth that could not be denied. Even the coldest among them could not pretend they had never longed for what she spoke of. One alien, smaller and softer in voice, whispered from the back rows, "Your people, they still love, even when they suffer?" The woman turned, her eyes gentle but filled with fire. "Yes, we love not because it is easy, but because it is hard. That is what makes us human. That is why Earth is still alive." Her words spread like a quiet storm, impossible to ignore. The chamber was filled with rulers who had lived entire lives on perfect worlds, safe worlds, where hardship was rare. They did not understand what it meant to cling to life through love, through sacrifice. And now, in her voice, they saw something they had never seen before. The true heart of humanity. The human heart was unveiled before them, raw and undeniable. It was not polished, not perfect, not cold like their power. It was scarred, battered, broken many times, but it kept beating. And that beating echoed now through the chamber, drowning out all their laughter. For the first time since the session began, the woman was no longer just a lonely voice. She was a mirror, showing them what they had lost in their endless chase for perfection. She showed them the one thing that set humanity apart, the refusal to stop loving, even when everything else was gone. The council sat in silence, heavy and shaken. The debate had turned fierce, but in that fierceness, a new truth had emerged. And in that moment, the human heart spoke louder than all their power combined. The chamber sat heavy with silence. For the first time since the hearing began, no laughter dared to rise. The human woman had spoken of love, of sacrifice, of the heart that refused to surrender. Her voice, steady and raw, had peeled away the layers of arrogance that filled the hall. Yet the council was not ready to surrender its pride. They were rulers of worlds, guardians of civilizations, and they could not allow one fragile voice to shake their power so easily. From the highest seat, a leader finally rose. His presence alone made the chamber tremble. His body shimmered like stone laced with fire, his eyes glowing with ancient power. He was older than most in the room, older than entire empires, and his words carried the weight of centuries. When he spoke, the air itself seemed to bend. "Human," he began, his tone sharp as a blade. "You speak of courage, of love, of survival, yet these are nothing but fragile emotions. They will not save a dying world. You call Earth your home, but what if your home demands your life? Tell us, would you still cling to it then? Would you still dare to call Earth home if it cost you everything?" The chamber froze. The challenge was absolute. It was not just a question, it was a trap. If she hesitated, they would call her a liar. If she faltered, they would laugh again. The weight of a planet's worth pressed onto her shoulders, and the council leaned in, eager to see her break. But she did not break. She lifted her head, and though her voice was calm, it carried through the chamber like thunder rolling across empty skies. "Yes, even if Earth demanded my life, I would call it home. Because home is not something you abandon when it becomes hard. Home is where you stand, where you fight, where you give everything for those you love. If I must die for Earth, then I die knowing my life had meaning." The words struck like a shockwave. For a heartbeat, no one moved. The council's faces, so often cold and untouchable, flickered with surprise. This was not the desperate plea of a cornered being. It was a declaration. It was defiance, pure and unshaken. One alien tried to laugh, but the sound fell flat, hollow against the gravity of her words. Another shifted uncomfortably in his seat. A few whispered, voices low, betraying a doubt that had never touched them before. The woman took another step forward, her figure small beneath the towering ceiling, yet her presence filled the hall. "You sit in judgment of my world. You mock its scars and call it weak. But let me ask you this, what world has ever stood without struggle? What people have ever grown without pain? You call us fragile, yet you fear us enough to mock us. Why? Because you know the truth. You know there is power in those who refuse to surrender. That is humanity. That is Earth. Her words cut deeper than logic, deeper than reason. They carried a truth that even the mightiest could not dismiss. For in her defiance, they saw something they had long forgotten, the will to fight for something greater than themselves. The elder with fire in his veins sat slowly back into his seat. His eyes still glowed, but the sharp edge of his challenge had dulled. Around him, murmurs grew louder, no longer filled with scorn but with unease, even respect. And then, something remarkable happened. A younger council member, with delicate wings that shimmered like glass, rose to speak. Her voice was soft, almost hesitant, but it carried across the chamber. She is alone in this hall, yet she does not bend. She speaks not of wealth or power, but of heart. I have lived on worlds with no storms, no hunger, no struggle. And yet, her words remind me of something my own people have forgotten. Perhaps Earth is not unworthy. Perhaps it is we who no longer understand the meaning of strength. The hall stirred with shock. A voice from within the council itself had broken the wall of mockery. Others frowned, but others leaned back, their silence no longer cruel but thoughtful. The tide was shifting, slowly but surely. The woman stood still, her chest rising with steady breaths. She had not come expecting victory. She had come only to speak the truth. But now, she could feel it. The balance tilting, the laughter fading, the weight of her words taking root in the hearts of even her fiercest enemies. This was the turning point. What began as mockery had become debate. What began as laughter had turned into silence. And now, silence had become something even greater. Respect, fragile and unspoken, but real. The human had not come with armies or weapons. She had come only with her voice, and yet, with that voice, she had shaken a hall of giants. And as she stood there, alone but unbroken, the chamber began to realize that the world they mocked as unlivable was defended by something far stronger than they had ever faced, the unyielding heart of humanity. The council chamber had never known such stillness. For centuries, it had echoed with voices, commands, judgments, debates that thundered like storms. Yet now, after the human woman's words, silence reigned. It was not the silence of boredom or dismissal. It was the silence of a truth that had pierced deeper than pride. The human stood alone in the circle of light. Her hands were at her sides, her face calm but resolute. She did not smile in victory, nor did she tremble in fear. She simply waited, her quiet strength pressing harder on the chamber than any speech had before. The elder with fire in his veins sat stiffly in his seat. His challenge had been meant to crush her, to expose her weakness. Instead, her answer had turned the weight back onto him. Around him, the other rulers avoided his eyes. For all their mocking and arrogance, none could deny the power of her defiance. One by one, the voices that had ridiculed her fell silent. The alien with black wings who once shouted of ruin now shifted uncomfortably, his claws tapping against the desk with unease. The crystal-bodied elder who dismissed her as a weed in poisoned soil kept his gaze low, unwilling to meet her eyes. Even the creature with sharp teeth, who had spoken of humanity as destroyers, pressed its mouth closed, its words lost. The silence grew heavier, stretching into something almost unbearable. The chamber, so often loud and unyielding, now felt fragile. And all because one human had refused to surrender. At last, a voice rose, soft but steady. It belonged to the younger council member with glass-like wings, the one who had dared to show sympathy earlier. She has spoken with no armor and no allies, yet her words carry more weight than our endless mockery. Tell me, are we so blind that we cannot see what stands before us? She defends a world we scorn, and yet she does so without fear. Perhaps the strength we dismiss is the very strength we have lost. The chamber rippled with whispers. Some were angered by her words, but others were unsettled, their arrogance shaken. The human lifted her head, her eyes scanning the room. Her voice rose again, not loud but clear enough to fill the vast space. You think silence proves me wrong? No. Silence proves you hear me. You have called my world broken, dying, unworthy. But still you sit here, unable to deny the truth. Earth lives because we refuse to let it die. Humanity endures because our hearts will not yield. You cannot laugh at that anymore. Her words struck again, like ripples spreading across still water. This time no one answered. The silence was not empty. It was alive, filled with thoughts unspoken. The counselors exchanged glances, some defensive, some uncertain. It was rare, almost impossible, for this chamber to fall so quiet. Yet now the silence spoke louder than all their arguments. The woman let the weight settle, then continued softly. You sit on perfect worlds, untouched by storms, safe in your power. But what happens when the day comes that your skies darken? What happens when your seas rise or your lands burn? Will you endure, or will you crumble? Humanity has learned to endure, to rise again and again. That is the gift Earth gave us. And it is why Earth is not unlivable, it is unbreakable. The words lingered like firelight in the darkness. The elder with glowing horns, who once called love weakness, finally shifted in his seat. His expression was unreadable, but he did not speak. The iron-skinned giant who had mocked human colonies leaned back slowly, his forearms folding across his chest. None of them would admit it aloud, but the silence betrayed them. They were shaken. The woman had not only defended Earth, she had forced them to look inward. In her defiance, they saw a reflection of their own emptiness. They had forgotten the meaning of struggle, the strength born from hardship. They had mocked Earth because they feared to remember what it meant to fight for survival. The silence deepened, stretching long. In that stillness, her words grew larger than her body, larger than her voice. They filled the hall, echoing inside the hearts of those who once scorned her. Finally, she lowered her voice, almost a whisper, but the chamber heard every syllable. You may judge Earth today. You may call it weak. But remember this. A world mocked can still endure. A race underestimated can still rise. And a voice ignored can still shake the stars. That is humanity. That is my home. No one spoke. No one laughed. The chamber sat frozen, caught between pride and awakening. For the first time, they were not deciding Earth's fate with arrogance. They were forced to weigh it with respect. And in that silence, heavier, stronger, louder than any roar, the truth stood unchallenged. The human had changed the chamber forever. The chamber that once thundered with scorn now felt like the inside of a tomb. Not a single laugh dared to rise. Not a single insult found its way into the air. The silence had stretched so long that even the walls seemed to hum with her words. The human woman remained in the center of the light, steady as a mountain, her gaze sweeping over those who had mocked her world. They had called Earth unlivable. They had called humanity fragile. Yet here she stood, one voice, one heart, and she had turned their ridicule into silence. The elder with fire veins leaned forward, his glowing eyes no longer cruel, but thoughtful. For centuries, he had judged countless species, dismissed countless pleas. Yet none had struck him the way this human had. He opened his mouth, but for the first time in memory, no words came. He sat back slowly, his pride shaken, his certainty cracked. Across the hall, the younger counselor with glass-like wings finally stood again. Her voice trembled, but her words carried honesty. All of us came here today ready to laugh. We came ready to condemn. But this human has shown us something we cannot deny. We thought Earth weak, yet I see no weakness in her. I see strength. Not the strength of armies or wealth, but the strength of spirit. Tell me, when was the last time any of us spoke with such fire for our own worlds? The question pierced the chamber. Heads turned, eyes lowered. Some shifted uncomfortably, as if her words exposed something they had buried. The woman in the circle of light did not smile, did not boast. She simply stood, her silence now as powerful as her voice had been. She had said all she needed. The rest was up to them. One by one, murmurs spread among the council. The black-winged alien who once mocked Earth as chaos now cleared his throat but said nothing, his claws stilling against the table. The crystal-bodied elder who had compared humanity to weeds now looked uneasy, as if the comparison no longer fit. The creature with sharp teeth sat rigid, its eyes flicking toward the human but quickly turning away, unable to meet her gaze. The silence was not empty anymore. It was the silence of respect, reluctant but undeniable. Finally, the elder with the crown of glowing horns rose. He had been one of her fiercest critics, dismissing love as weakness. His voice now carried less sharpness, though pride still lingered. You have spoken of love, of sacrifice, of struggle. These are things we have dismissed. Perhaps we were wrong. Perhaps humanity is not as small as we believed. You endure storms, you rebuild from ruin, you love even in pain. That is not weakness. The hall stirred. Those last two words, not weakness, were heavier than any praise. They were the first step, the crack in the wall. The woman lifted her chin. Her voice was soft but unshaken. I do not stand here to beg for your approval. Earth will endure with or without it. But know this, when you mocked us, you mocked what you have forgotten about yourselves. We are not perfect. We stumble, we fight, we fall. But we rise again. That is our gift. And that is why we will always call Earth our home. The chamber absorbed her words like soil drinking rain. For the first time, many of the counselors looked at her not as an insect or a nuisance, but as an equal. They saw not just one woman but the reflection of an entire race, scarred and battered but unbroken. The younger counselor with glass wings spoke again, her voice firmer now. I will not mock Earth again, and I will not mock those who defend it with such courage. Perhaps we have more to learn from humanity than we thought. Her words spread like sparks across the chamber. Some remained quiet, unwilling to yield. Others nodded slightly, their silence agreeing with her. The tide had turned fully now. The woman bowed her head slightly, not in submission, but in acknowledgement. She had not come to win them all, only to speak truth. But in that truth, she had shifted something larger than herself. The chamber did not declare Earth perfect. It did not erase the scars or the struggles. But it did something greater. Stopped laughing. It listened. It respected. And when the human finally turned and walked out of the circle of light, she did so not as the weak representative of a broken world, but as the voice of a people who had reminded the stars what strength truly was. Behind her, the council sat in silence once more. Only now, it was not the silence of mockery, but of respect. A respect that no one could ever take back. The chamber had been changed forever. And so had the way the galaxy saw humanity.